As an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people are going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's a stone wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle, thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Saturday noontime Eastern Seaboard. We're here live streaming to you on Rumble, rumble.com/amradpod. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever you are, make sure that you do smash the thumbs up and follow the channel. And if you listen to the audio, subscribe to iTunes and iHeart, Spotify, so you can get the automatic show updates when we drop them to you, which administratively will be changing, because as of next week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 0930 is the new show time and show days. We're excited. We think that this is going to be a great chance for us to expand an even bigger audience. So we're glad to have you along for the ride. And it also means that today, Saturday, it's the last Saturday. So we're going to have to do something in a true American Radicals Podcast fashion. And that's dunk on our ex-girlfriend, the FBI, in a historical sense, and then bring it up to modern day. So for the last Saturday, I'm glad to have Garrett O'Boyle with me at GOBActual. Social media follow. Make sure you do follow him there, because he's falling behind. He's got to catch up so he can experience the knowledge of you can get direct messages from a lot of crazy people. How you doing today, Garrett?
I'm doing a final AMRAD Saturday. Steve, the last few days have been I've had some joy. Not the Kamala Harris style joy, but joy enough. But as life goes, especially as a suspendable, the joy doesn't last very long, always, does it? So
The joy is unburdened by what has been.
Yes, it is. It is unburdened by what has been. Let's see, what day would this have been? So Thursday, I get contacted by some of my lawyers with some information, which hopefully I'll be able to talk about it a little bit more in depth relatively soon. But no surprise where it's like, oh, great, back to the stress that this position of trying to blow the whistle on the government brings with it. So we'll see, but maybe some interesting developments. I'll say this point as a little teaser: lots of redactions, heavily redacted information. So, sometimes even I struggle with the stress of it all, and it's like, well, I can't even see the most important stuff in coming from this information. So it's the interesting lives and times of the suspendables will continue, Steve.
Well, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So today's theme is the self-licking ice cream cone, the descriptor of the bureaucracy. It exists just to exist. Its mission is to create more of a mission for itself. And you talk about having lots of blacked out entries. That's pretty appropriate, because we're going to look back at a couple of examples of those, and then the latest one that we have, that's just yet another gross display of the playbook. But let's look to the historical first, because we've been kind of down. I went down this rabbit hole. This headlineusa.com website's been doing some pretty good work covering on a lot of the malfeasance that goes on within federal law enforcement. And it's been sort of my go-to for finding it. And wouldn't you know it, this guy's name is Ken Silva, the journalist. I verified him. I talked to Trevor Aronson. He said, "Yep, he's a good dude. Not nothing to complain about him. He's still covering the same work. He just tends to be covering it from the other side of the political spectrum. Aaron coming from the left, Ken seems to be coming from a more right perspective, but still noticing and displaying and exposing what's going on." But he did this profile series, the Fed Files, and I want to go over a couple of them. And it talks about one particular cat is really the genesis for it, who he must have fostered a relationship with, a victim, if you will, of the FBI playbook or targeting. And Fed Files 1, tortured inmate alleges FBI plot to manufacture right-wing violence. The more things change, the more they stay the same.
You know what's funny? Even just right off of the bat there, tortured inmate. Not that long ago, probably just a few years, I would have been like, okay, whatever. This is a bunk story, tortured inmate, give me a break. But then the more you dig into it, the more you realize, oh, maybe not.
Well, you'll appreciate the quandary that our guy here, who's the source of it, his name is Bill White. That's actually his name. I don't think it's a pseudonym. Bill White, who is the inmate. So in
Not not to be confused with Walter White, right? Like, I mean, maybe that's where the writers got their, because didn't Walter White, he did kind of get embedded with some white supremacists at some point, shaved his head and all.
Well, this guy, he is kind of like in search of a movement. So apparently his background was radical left-wing anarchy, and then he turned to Nazism. So Bill White's
Okay.
probably not a guy we would get along with, but in the alleged land of the free, you have the ability to be a jerk as long as you don't hurt anyone. In 2008, he got in trouble. He threatened to publish the information of a federal juror involved in the case of another guy whose name was Matthew Hale. He was charged and sentenced to 30 months imprisonment because he published the Hale juror's information, which I probably think was open source information, but there is a little bit of anonymity attached, I believe, to being a juror. I would have to check on that. But
Yeah, I
he
don't know.
successfully filed a motion and got an acquittal on First Amendment grounds. So
Okay.
win for Bill. However, prosecutors appealed the decision. They lost a trial, and they appeal, which is pretty rare from the feds. They normally just kind of take the L and move on. And not only did the appeals court side with the DOJ and order White back to prison, the justices granted the DOJ's appeal for an even harsher sentence. How dare you move
Dude.
to get away from our charge? And so at this point, he decided to UFAP, right? When, you know what? This guy's a Nazi and he's a jerk. But if your government tries to put you in jail and you beat it on the First Amendment, and then they appeal and put you back in the pokey, and it was for the First Amendment, you're like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to Mexico. I don't necessarily hate the spirit of that, which is what he did. The UFAP is the unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. That's the acronym. And Mr. White there fled to Mexico instead of reporting back to prison. They were like, you're convicted. You're going to do more time. You got to report next week to prison. And he was like, not doing it. Right.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of can't blame the guy, because he's probably like, when he got his initial appeal, where like, yeah, you win First Amendment grounds, and then the government appeals, and then he gets a stricter sentence. That's not how it's supposed to work here.
And a lot of what Bill White says cannot be verified, but he does bring receipts on others. So Ken Silva gives him a little bit of latitude on this. So he claims that that's not what happened. He claims that he didn't run to Mexico to avoid going to prison. He claimed that he got wind that there was a rogue FBI informant within the Nazi movement that he was playing around with that was going to kill him. So he fled the country. I mean, take it for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Maybe he was just trying to spin a story, but regardless, he runs to Mexico. He was arrested in Mexico months later, sent back to U.S. prison. And then soon after that, the DOJ slapped additional charges on him for allegedly sending Facebook threats to public officials while he was on the lam. Now, if you're on the lam from the federal government, Do you think that you have the operational security knowledge to not send threats on Facebook?
Um,
Is he either dumb or is there maybe something more to the fact that he thinks he might be being victimized here? White denied sending the threats, claiming that FBI informants hacked his account and impersonated him.
hmm.
He was convicted and he's now incarcerated until 2037.
Oof.
So hit him hard, right? And
Real hard.
now
They
he's
don't want this information coming out, Steve.
no, but I think he's found a journalist who's willing to bring it up there. So that to close out on this tale, which kind of leads into the next one, during a 2019 medical exam by a psychologist, White was once held. It came out that he was held in isolation in a brightly lit cell for 3 months, slept for only an hour a day during that time, and that contributed to him developing PTSD. And shortly after that, he
Yeah.
filed a 97-page affidavit in 2020, which because the Bureau of Prisons restricted his mail privileges. They essentially said that you're sending communications to your attorney, but then he's turning around and giving them to who you want it to go to, so you're not going to be able to give this information out there. So I
Hmm.
don't know. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of smoke here, at the
Yeah.
very least.
Yes. My curiosity is definitely piqued because this is something people you probably would understand this if you don't already, but you can't necessarily trust a guy like this even when he has receipts. Was there I may have slipped slipped it here, but is he was he a CHS or anything like that? Did he ever claim that?
No, no, he
Okay,
didn't
so
claim to
he
be a
didn't claim that.
CHS, but he knows others who were.
Okay, so
So
yeah,
he was able, and that's why it's almost like a parlay bet where it's compounding on this. So you don't know on this story, right? As a standalone story, he could just be some crazy Nazi who's making stuff
right,
up, right?
right.
You tend though to lend credibility to someone if they bring receipts on other things, right?
Yep.
You sort of give them that more benefit of the doubt. You say, hey, this, I mean, it's no different than handling or managing a source, right? They've been credible before. The information has shaken out to be accurate. So when they come to me with something off the wall, I'm more inclined to believe it if they don't necessarily have all the goods here, right?
Right.
So to maybe bolster the allegations he makes here, and again, we don't know, let's go to the Fed files number 2. Again, coming from Headline USA, Ken Silva. FBI informant created one of the largest Nazi groups in American history.
The plot thickens.
So,
Wait a second, Steve. Wait a second. Why on earth would the FBI do such a thing?
I don't know, because it's a self-licking ice cream cone, perhaps. This group, the National Socialist Movement. So remember the debate is the socialists versus the fascists, and the Nazis are fascists. No, they're socialists, by the way. National Socialist Movement, founded in 1974 by these two guys, Cliff Harrington and Robert Brannon. By 1976, there was a growing suspicion within the movement, though, that Brannon was working with the FBI. A rival Nazi group. They have rivals.
There's just there's just so many of them out there.
It's like the Jets and the Sharks snapping at each other.
Yeah.
So the rival group is called the National Socialist White People's Party. They argued that Brannon was an informant. So
I
now it's
mean, you're gonna make that if
you're coming in strong if
yeah,
you've got that group name.
yeah, golly, but it's a logical
It's a thing to do to
claim.
mess up your rival, right?
Yeah,
Like, hey,
yes,
you guys are the informants. Come over to
yeah,
our party
yeah, because
because
you got to imagine most of the people in these groups they probably hang around at like the same place. I would say places, but it's probably like one place, like one bar, or one I don't know,
you think there's
wherever Nazis hang out.
multiple.
And it's like, hey, we got to start talking. We got to start talking shit on that other group. How about, hey, let's say their leader is a Fed. I mean, that
That's,
happens.
I mean, that happens within gang rivalry all the
Yeah,
time,
all the time.
right? So you have to wonder: is it true? Is it not? Right? So to the story here, Fed Files number 2, and it's only 2 years into the existence of this NSM, National Socialist Movement. FBI memo warned. This is an FBI memo.
FBI memo, so it's
Warned
the
that
real deal.
Brennan's cover might have been blown.
Dun dun
The
dun.
redacted, this is typical FBI, ready? The redacted memo doesn't show the informant's name, but it identifies Brannon by referencing a National Socialist article and the accusations floating around him at the time. Quote, informant's photograph and description appear in the February 1976 publication, and he was named on an FBI informant, the FBI memo says.
Wow.
So they out their own informant in this memo. And
Hey, FBI, you're not supposed to do that.
snitches get stitches. All right. So, but this guy Brannon, he led the NSM until he had a stroke in 1983. So he basically was at the helm for 9 years, and the entire time an informant for the FBI, one of the founding members. Okay, and this has been verified by an FBI memo. We know that.
Yeah.
So now let's move to a different person.
Like,
Within
how do you remain in your position as the leader of this group? At what point? How do you continue to convince people? Like, no, I'm not a snitch anymore. Like, is that what
I'm
you're
thinking
saying?
the memo was not made public until after he was no longer at the helm. The allegations probably just circled around him, and as a founder of a Nazi party, you probably have to be kind of a charismatic guy. I mean, look, you watch the old tapes, and I don't speak German, but I don't get it. What's the appeal of that little dude running around with that ridiculous mustache? But I guess the general consensus was that he was this amazing speaker.
Yeah,
If you had,
oratory skills, Steve.
do you think he's like Lars from the Goonies? All right. So second person in this exact same organization, the NSM, National Socialist Movement. His name is Jeff Shoup. Jeff Shoup. He led them from 1994 until the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally in 2017. So that's 21 years.
Hmm.
All right. So now back to Bill, our friend from the first article. Bill White accused Shoup of being an informant in a lawsuit. He filed a FOIA lawsuit against the FBI from prison. According to Bill White, our original guy, the FBI took control of this Nazi organization as of early 2004 and likely much earlier. White said in his FOIA lawsuit that the FBI and ATF would use the National Socialist Movement to hold phony white supremacist rallies. In an October of 2020 sworn declaration to the court in a separate matter, this guy likes to play in the courts, Bill White. He's got nothing else to do, I guess, from prison.
Yeah.
So he cited a heavily redacted FBI memo he obtained via the FOIA that he got. The memo said that the FBI interviewed a National Socialist Movement associate who was in Chicago when law enforcement arrested Matthew Hale. And if you remember that, he originally, Bill White got in trouble because he exposed the juror in that Matthew Hale trial. So he's just been like kind of flying around the FBI like this mosquito and poking, but he's been able to expose that Shoup himself was a source. And you don't even need to know what this crazy Nazi from prison thinks. You can just go to Jeff Shoup's X profile.
Oh, how about that?
For those watching and not reading, this is a picture of a challenge coin that he has from the FBI National Academy Associates. He says, Jeff says, quote, honored to speak twice at the Midwest Police Expo for Illinois, hashtag Police Chiefs Association and FBI. Thanks, hashtag FBI, for the commemorative coin. It's ironic how life has changed. In the past, I avoided law enforcement like the plague. Today, we are on the same side in service to hashtag humanity.
Sure you are. Sure. Yeah. It's good work if you can get it. What do you think, Steve? You think he's still getting paid as a CHS?
Well, he claims to have disavowed the Nazi lifestyle
Oh,
in the
sure.
wake of the Charlottesville.
Oh yeah, it was just too
event.
much for you, wasn't it?
So that spurred him to walk away from the Nazis and spurred Joe Biden to run for president. So you never know how that's going to impact you.
Yeah.
But again, we'll close the loop on these Fed files. I'll go back to the second piece here. Because they keep naming some more names. And again, if you bring the receipts, I'm more inclined to believe you. So assuming that Shoup wasn't, in fact, an FBI informant, the National Socialist Movement was nevertheless infiltrated by feds during his leadership. He was in charge from 94 to 2017. Court proceedings revealed that the leader of their Florida chapter, David Gleddy, was an informant.
Oh, another one.
Gleddy published a memoir titled Undercover Nazi. In 2012, another prominent member of the NSM revealed himself as a federal informant. The informant's name was Brian Holland, and he'd been a candidate for U.S. president in 2008. So you don't get to be a presidential candidate for this Nazi group, I think, without being a prominent member. I don't think you're just a backbencher. He went to Holland, went to neo-Nazi gatherings and reported on their activities to the FBI. According to Holland, at times he was making about $8,000 a month from the FBI.
8,000 a month.
And the last one, their current leader, is named Bert Colucci, and he did an interview with Headline USA. They sat down with the current president for the National Socialist Movement, the Nazis, and he said that he was recruited to be an informant by the FBI.
So
and he said, I turned it down.
I turned it down.
I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
But
well, of course, if you were, even if you didn't turn it down, you would say you turned it down if you were in fact a snitch for the FBI.
It's kind of you don't provide a different answer, right? It's not possible. If you admit you are, you're kind of done.
Yeah.
So no is the only answer you're going to get out of him. But
it seems like it comes with the territory. Like, if you want to be the leadership of the Nazis in America, you need to work for the FBI. How about that?
So this kind of relates to the Trevor Aronson piece about the Black Lives Matter group in Colorado.
Yep.
Which were not planning to do anything violent. They were doing protests, and we don't have to agree with their ideology. Same as the Nazis. So in the alleged land of the free, you're allowed to do that. So the issue then that these two Fed files bring up to me is that the FBI is infiltrating organizations without a predicate.
Right.
What's the reason for doing that? If there's, it doesn't say anything in these pieces, at least, that the informants provided information about ongoing criminal activity. It just seems to be gathering intelligence on people.
Well, I know that Christopher Wray would say something to the effect of, we put caveats and warnings on this information not to target groups or people for constitutionally protected activity. Which, by the way, being a Nazi and using your First Amendment right to spew hate is still First Amendment protected activity. You don't have to like it, but it's protected. Just like you don't have to like what BLM stands for. It's still protected. And, curiously, $8,000 a month to be the president of this group, that's more than an FBI agent makes, or it's more than I was making taking home.
And this was not recent. This is not like Joe Biden, $8,000 a month. I mean, you're talking about, this is over a decade ago.
Yeah. So yeah, even better. I mean, also, I would like to know, what are you reporting on to even justify that salary? And I know they don't call it, because here's the thing, everybody, it's not a salary when you're paying an informant.
It's cash.
It's cash payment. And for all you snitches out there, you got to pay taxes on that.
You've been duly warned, because the IRS agents are going to come after you for it. Here's my one quandary about it, because I think my spirit is with you in the alleged land of the free, right? But then the FBI's entire origins, if you read Big Intel by Mike Waller, is we're going after communists. Yeah. We're going after communists, and we're going to put them in jail or get them out of the country, right? So is there an argument to be made that we're going after Nazis?
I mean, it's not a bad argument, but this is where, and I think I've come a long way here. I've grown in this regard. Well, I was going to say while I was in law enforcement, and I guess that is true, but I suppose I'll put it this way: over the span of my adult life, especially, I've grown in the regard of, I become more and more, constitutionally speaking, an absolutist, where I don't have to like your speech, I don't have to agree with it, but you absolutely have the right. And so I lean towards saying that the government targeting a specific group just because they're bad, and they are, Nazis are bad. Well, I think Nazis are bad, and I think BLM is bad, and I think communists are bad. I don't know that I can fully support the government targeting any of them, though, for just spreading their ideology. I'm talking legally, for legal reasons. Okay, not some type of arson attack by a commie in 1918, or some Antifa BLM backed riot in 2020, or whatever Nazis have done that is illegal. that aside, I'm talking about their speech and their ideology, which by and large covers when they gather, when they protest, when they march, when they talk, when they tweet, when they do all of these things that make up the majority of their behavior. If you're the government and you think that that message is bad, then come up with a better argument. Which it's not hard to. That's why you have different groups and different ideologies, and why Nazis are a very small, subsect of society.
Th- If it's an actual threat of violence, that's one element. I'm thinking more along the lines of, well, when the Bureau came around, the communists were infiltrating the United States government and attempting to overthrow it, right? Which
Mhm.
is kind of a serious thing that you would want to have a continuity of government, protect the Constitution. If the communists are trying to overthrow a constitutional republic, then they kind of need to be put into jail or kicked out of the country. I think though that the communist threat was actually legitimate. They actually did have people who have infiltrated into the government at that point. So maybe there's a little bit more latitude here. I think the number of, despite the fact that there's two groups that were named here, I think that the infinitesimal number of people who actually subscribe to Nazi ideology, they're not trying to grab onto institutional power, right? They're just trying to hold rallies and be jerks, and the actual threat that they present is not there. It's just briefs really well, which is why this
Yes.
has been going on now. It seems like, well, here in this case, for 50 years that they've been
Mhm.
doing that. And even and this is probably a good point. We can even pivot to the next story we have because we talk about this track record. The Nazi story goes all the way back to the 70s. And then when the national security mission set for the FBI evolved after September 11th, they got all these extra goodies, including the assessment, which they only needed an articulable purpose. It opened up an investigation on any American not actually having a probable cause of a crime that had been committed or was likely to be committed. They just need to say, I want to find out about that guy, get the spidey sense. And that guy in the early 2000s, as friend Trevor Aronson's pointed out, was a lot of times a Muslim American or recent
Mhm.
immigrant or maybe first generation. And we'll go to the New York Times Magazine long form piece for the next story about the Herald Square bomber. Who wasn't?
Of course.
So this guy, you see his picture there. He's got a long name. His Shahawar Mateen Siraj. We'll just call him Siraj. I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of words. This piece is. It's worth reading through because of they give a lot of background of the history of the playbook. This is clearly a playbook type of case that went on, and it went on in the early 2000s, around 2003, 2004. Why mess up a good thing that the FBI has going on, right?
That's right.
So our boy here, Siraj, he met somebody else named Osama Eldawoody. Eldawoody. Siraj meets Eldawoody in 2003, and they became and struck up a great friendship, even though there was an age gap. Eldawoody started giving him rides to work, but then started to complain about the FBI because they were harassing him.
Mm.
They discussed Abu Ghraib prison and online images of Muslims being tortured. And Elderwoody seemed to share his friend's anger, and something had to be done.
Oh, there it
Oh
is.
no! Don't do it, Siraj. They agreed that an attack that would hurt the U.S. economically would help save Muslim lives. Siraj suggested the bridges they drove past or major subway stations in train lines. He was working in like a convenience store, right? He's not a capable guy. A year later, Siraj introduced Elderwoody to another guy whose name is James El Shafee. So James, we'll go with one that's easy to say. Uh, then, before Siraj knew it, it was no longer idle talk. So now we're in 2004. The three men visited Herald Square and made drawings that Elderwoody kept. But Siraj was starting to have doubts. One night, he sat at the back seat of Elderwoody's car, and the third guy, James, was in the front. Elderwoody said that he had connected friends upstate whom he called the brothers, and now
Mm.
they were keen to support this Herald Square attack. Siraj was tense. He was determined to find a way out of the plot, but he was afraid. Elderwoody handed him a backpack, and he said he said he didn't want it. He said, I'll help with the planning. I just don't want to be involved in the attack. So Elder Woody asked him more directly, "You don't want to be you don't want to put it there?" "No," he said. Elder
Hmm.
Woody pulled up to Siraj's apartment building. They shook hands, but Siraj could sense Elder Woody's frustration and disappointment. "I'm sorry," Siraj said, and he got out. Afterwards, Siraj said that, according to him, he said he begged for God's forgiveness, what he had almost become entangled in. He considered going to the police, but he was actually under investigation for some sort of misdemeanor uh, crime or fight that he got in. He worked at a bookstore. That's what it was. He got into a fight and he was getting charged with a misdemeanor. So he didn't want to go to the police because he thought that they were going to go after him for that. But after the car ride, he gets a phone call from the NYPD and they ask him to come into the station to talk about this misdemeanor scuffle he gets in. He gets out and boom, 4 Fed vehicles surround him and arrest him. It turns out Elder Woody was an informant.
Hmm.
So again, I don't think Siraj, very much like Bill White, is a good guy. Maybe he made the right decision at the fork of the road and just said, I'm not interested in doing the attack. I think probably what they leaned heavily on was that he said, I'll do the planning, right? But it's pretty clear reading that he didn't want to be involved in it and he didn't want to let his buddy down, right? His buddy of more than a year,
Right.
who had been a mentor because he's much older, a father figure. Apparently, at one point, Elder Woody said, I have health problems and I have this daughter. And Siraj said, I'm like a son to you. I'll take care of your daughter. Like that
Mhm.
was the closest of their relationship. So what does the snitch do? They lean on that and exploit it because they're paid for by the government
Yep.
and they need to be productive. In this case, Siraj was offered a plea deal and he said no, he didn't do anything wrong. He said, "You entrapped me." There was a 3-week trial. The jury deliberated for 10 hours and found him guilty.
Really?
Yeah. He is in federal prison right now, during which they go into when he's become friends with another person who was
Uh,
just real briefly. All right. Uh, Siraj was close to another person, another 25-year-old from California named Hamid, who died nearly died as a child. And soon after September 11th, civilian informant hired by the FBI befriended him, and the two discussed Islamist extremist groups and blah blah blah.
mm,
He got playbook too.
no
So
way. How?
he's now
Okay.
a celly who's a fellow victim of it.
Yeah. So he's, dude. I mean, I know we say it all the time. It's the playbook. They've been running it pretty much forever. Pretty much for the existence of the FBI. And they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop running the playbook.
I mean, just go back to this guy's case, right? This Siraj. What was the actual kernel, the genesis for him getting upset? It was conversations about the outrage of Abu Ghraib that he was having with an informant, which to me says the informant was pushing that conversation because he's this fatherly figure and he can more easily radicalize the younger guy who looks up to him.
Mm-hmm.
I highly doubt that the conversation organically sprung from Siraj after a year of this
Right.
fake friendship.
Right.
You,
It's
you had a snitch who only gets paid for being productive, and he holds on to this guy on the hook for a year.
mm-hmm.
He's pushing him. He's pushing him that entire time.
Right, right. And this is probably another piece that many people may not really understand. When you have a CHS, when you have a snitch on the books, like an official informant, you have to check in with them every so often, and the FBI agent is getting pinged from the SSA, the supervisory special agent, who's getting pinged from the ASAC, the assistant special agent, and all the way up and down. What are your sources doing? What are you coming up with? What cases are you opening? And so there's this downward pressure that gets to the field level agent to then query his sources. Okay, what are you working on? Who are you meeting in the community? What are you is there anybody who's planning anything? Is there anybody who maybe is geared a little bit in this way? And the CHS, they're like, well, if I want to get paid, I got to produce some information. And another piece of this too, I think, is the cultural differences. Where you mentioned the daughter of the CHS, and Siraj is like, "Hey, I'm like a son to you." The cultural aspects of Middle Eastern people are different than Americans, And the even if you aren't blood, although blood bonds are very important in that culture as well, but when you develop a relationship to this degree, he means most likely he is a son. Like there's a cultural divide there, and maybe even not well, I can't really think of anybody in my life who I look to as blood or a father, where I would say, hey, I'll take care of your daughter. But culturally speaking, I'm going to assume that he meant that just because of some of those differences. And so the CHS is certainly playing on that aspect to further ensnare him and entrap him into this scheme. And meanwhile, then the CHS was going and meeting with the case agent and saying, here's the further information that I got. Here's what he said now. And time again, like we've discussed ad nauseum with different examples, it's often the FBI plan or the CHS plan or a combination of the two to then get an unwitting or unwilling person involved in some type of plot like this. And then jurors find him guilty. That it blows my mind.
Well, I mean, this is in the first few years after September 11th. This
Doesn't
is in
help.
New York City.
Right.
You have to understand. I mean, it's like being a January 6th or going into Washington, D.C. at that point, right?
Yeah.
I think it's worth going back to what you talked about from the inside, the pressure that surrounds the confidential human source that exists in the FBI. The amount of pressure on all parts of it, it's insane.
Mm-hmm.
You're right that all of these various levels of the chain of command are drilling down on each other because there's a quota for the number of sources that you have to have. Every agent has, well, it's actually an average. The average number of sources per agent has to be 2. But there are people in the FBI who don't work cases, so they don't have sources. Ergo, other agents have to pick up the slack, right?
Yep.
And they don't care if your source is even giving you information related to your particular lane that you're in. I was
Right.
working on child pornography. There's not a lot of sources there, right? Like
Mhm.
if you're
Yeah.
in that area, like I probably need to be investigating you. And they, that there were underlings, people that were a lower GS pay rate than I was, who were reaching out to me saying, well, you don't have any sources. We'll find you sources. We'll do the type 5 assessments. Well, we'll assess people for you to then go and approach to recruit to become sources for the government. And if they're not productive, and they might be productive for one case, right? After that, you don't have anything to deal with them. Some people have more information about other things going on, but there's constant pressure of they need to be a productive source. They can't be an unproductive source. It's been 6 months and they haven't given you a new case yet. You got to get them off the books. You got to get a productive source. That would take even an effective agent a lot of time to cultivate a stable of sources that are constantly providing information. So a lot of times it gets made up, and a lot of times it is these guys who are then enticed because you want them to be productive for you. They want to be productive, so they want to get paid, and they know that if they don't give you information, then they're going to all of a sudden be off the dime. And everybody is perversely incentivized to push the vulnerable person via the playbook because that's just the easiest thing to do, as opposed to looking around and being like, oh, there's no threats right now. There just aren't. It's not that we're not looking for them,
Right.
but the presumption is that under every rock there's a threat coming. And that even starts within the training that you get. I mean,
Oh yeah.
they snuff out any doubt in your mind that there's not a ninja that's going to descend from the ceiling on you in training. I mean, we've talked about it that the FBI Academy has Hogan's Alley where they have actual houses and businesses that make it look like a fake city. And you go to clear a house and they have hidden trap doors where people will pop out and they built to hit you in the back of the head. I'm sorry, that's not realistic. Like, oh, I
No.
should have known that I pull on the lamp and the door swings open. Are you kidding me?
Right.
I'm
Right.
not in a fake spy novel, Abbott and Costello. This is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, and it's right there and right then for many who walk through those hallways in Quantico who don't have prior law enforcement experience, where their mind is then molded to think everything is a threat, every person is a threat, and I need to stop them. That is my mandate, is to stop them. And then they come out into the world, and everything they get, every Guardian lead they get, your name slid across my desk. Every time it's, oh, this is, I've got to look into this. This is going to be the next
It's the next big one, and I'm not saying to dismiss everything,
right,
but I'm
right.
saying
You
is you
can't.
have to evaluate what you have and say, "That's not an allegation of a crime," and for you to say, "Well, I don't wanna be the person that got this and then didn't follow up on it."
Hmm.
Well, you can clearly have your conscience clear and say, "I got a tip that came in that somebody was exercising their First Amendment rights."
Yeah.
And that's not within the purview of the federal government to be policing.
Hmm. I
Because
think
just because after that they turned dark is not on us.
right, right. I think a good example of that, and I will caveat it this way: I don't know all the details because I didn't work this case. I wasn't even in the FBI when this happened. But the Boston Marathon bombing, you find out later that the FBI went and talked to, I forget which one,
Tsarnaev.
who went and talked to one of the Tsarnaev brothers, because they got a tip about him, and they went and talked to him, and they put it to bed. And then I think it was like 3 or 4 or 5 years later, they end up doing the Boston Marathon bombing, and then there's some outrage, and it's like, well, he was on our, and you know what? I send the memes out. I got them, like the Bart Simpson memes with the FBI hat where it says "say the line," and then Bart says he was on our list. And yes, that it happens so frequently that I think some of the time the FBI isn't doing a good enough job. But in some cases you do. You run it down as best you can, and you determine there's no threat here. This person is not a threat. They are just engaging in their First Amendment protected activity, or whatever the case may be. And then you close it down. You close the Guardian or the case down, and then 5 years later they blow up the marathon. I mean, you can't. How can
That's
you?
why I never take it too seriously when they say, "Well, they were on the FBI's radar."
Yeah.
Well, I mean, define radar.
Right.
If they
Right.
had a report of an actual crime and they just looked the other way, like Omar Mateen, the Pulse nightclub shooter, that's one
Right.
thing.
Right.
But if it's just some neighbor who's mad and kind of crazed and says, "I'm going to call the FBI because you play your music too loud,"
Hmm.
that's not really on the bureau at that point. And
We
that takes
we
a lot for me to not blame the bureau.
Yeah. There was one when I was in Wichita. It was similar, and the neighbor literally called the FBI because their neighbor was Middle Eastern, and it's like,
That
you're the
happens.
yeah, you're the bad person here, not them. And yeah, anyways, but that type of thing happens frequently, and some people are probably wondering, hey guys, how many, you said that it's an average of two sources per. Well, does the FBI put out the numbers? No, they don't, because of secrets. I don't know. It's a secret, though. It's a national secret that the number of CHSs that the FBI has. If you're watching, you see it up on the screen, this OIG report. This comes from 2019. So although the FBI will never tell us how many sources they actually have, which to me seems bizarre, Steve. The FBI
We
is
are paying
alleged.
them.
Yeah, we are paying the FBI to keep us safe, allegedly, and then they turn around and give us next to no information. But what we do know from this report is that between 2012 and 2018, there was an annual budget of $42 million that the FBI paid to CHSs. So I don't know what the average source payment is. I don't think that's even broken down enough in here, because then it wouldn't take a mathematician to figure out roughly how many CHSs the FBI has. But 42 million seems like a lot of money when I think of the amounts I would pay CHSs. I don't know that I ever paid a CHS more than $1,500, and that would be like a high payment, I would think. And
That'd be
oftentimes,
rich, but it also depends.
yeah,
I was dealing on Indian reservations, and a couple $100 was a big deal for them. So it's all relative.
right.
Um,
It
so
does seem like a big budget, and it's hard for me not to think of the Holocaust Memorial Museum trip. And I think I mentioned it recently in the last handful of episodes, the Some Were Neighbors exhibit. And part of what that government did was pit the populace against each other, where you were afraid. Is this person an informant. And that was a huge piece of the authoritarian rule that the Nazis used, was to have you afraid of your neighbor and to have you afraid that they were going to report you to the government. I don't know, man. I think we're at a point where we should have some of that legitimate concern that, is my neighbor just because I voted for Trump? Well, it goes to some of our protected disclosures, like the school boards. They asked me about this in my deposition. Because they set up that snitch line, as Jim Jordan likes to call it, this to so neighbors could call on their neighbor and say, "Hey, I don't like this parent who showed up at the school board." And
Mhm.
so neighbors were calling on neighbors. And I don't know, man. In an allegedly free nation, that that's a very, very slippery slope.
Well, we started 50 years ago in the 70s for that Nazi group, and then we have Siraj in the early 2000s. And let's bring it home to today, the most recent example. And you're right about not knowing the number of snitches, but they are not that. Maybe the new iteration evolution is, let's use as many snitches as we can on every single case, because then we can get lots more money
Yeah.
thrown at us. So this one emerged, and it was worth digging into a little bit long form here. The original press statement comes from the Department of Justice, but a man named Skylar
Mm,
Philippi, we'll just call him Skylar because that's a really weird name. Maybe that contributed to his radicalization. But the DOJ said that a man was arrested and charged with attempting to use a weapon of mass destruction and to destroy an energy facility in Nashville.
that's quite the plot there,
It
Steve.
is. And we are the American radicals. So we got the receipts. This is a complaint, criminal complaint against Skylar Philippi, comes from the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee, making those very allegations. But included in this complaint is an actual summary of what really did go on here. I think it's worth a little bit long form finding out about this plot that Skylar was really actually looking into doing, and then how he was provoked and radicalized into doing something that would comport with the headline that I just read you from the DOJ. And this is actually a shorter timeline, which surprised me by it, but it shouldn't surprise me at how it ended and the time that it did end. But it began, according to the complaint, in June of this year. So pretty short for a counterterrorism case. The FBI received information that Skylar was in communication with a CHS. CHS, confidential human source. That's the first thing they say right out of the box. So you've already got a source that's out there, trying to find one. And Skylar, according to the snitch, wanted to commit a mass shooting at a YMCA. Is that a federal crime, Garrett?
No, it's not. It's
No.
a state crime.
So if you have a legitimate allegation, someone is planning a crime of violence, a mass shooting, the most prudent thing that you could probably do is alert local law
Yeah,
enforcement.
the real police, as we like to call them here.
They didn't do that though. So what did they do? Well, they had this first snitch introduce Skylar to a second snitch.
Well, the plot thickens again.
And that took them a month. So for a month, they let this guy percolate in his head that he wanted to go shoot up YMCA.
He could have done it in that time if he
And
was
then they
really
would have
committed.
he would have been on their radar, maybe. I don't know at that point.
Yes, yeah.
But they started communicating. The call was recorded. Skylar sent text messages to the second snitch and included statements sent out that he wanted he had this ideology that he called accelerationist. He said acceleration is a double-edged sword for those without knowledge. He sounds not like he has his mental faculties. He sounds kind of retarded, like a vulnerable person.
Yes.
Then wouldn't you know it, he graduated from talking about, I want to go and shoot up a YMCA, to I want to attack a large interstate electronic substation. Do you think that he might have been groomed into that? Because that seems like a federal crime.
Yes,
So
that,
he either has illusions of grandeur,
uh-huh.
or he's not really committed to anything, and he seems highly suggestible. That
And, okay, we talked about this recently with the international terrorism type of case where your golden star, what your pursuit, which I'm saying it this way because it's wrong. It's incorrect. It's an incorrect point of view. It's an incorrect perspective from a law enforcement standpoint to have this be the end goal. to pick your crime. In this case, in international terrorism cases, it's material support to a terrorist organization. That's the one they want you to get. The FBI wants you to get that material support charge. Oh, if we could get that material support charge. Well, in the FBI's WMD directorate, the targeting of this facility or using a weapon of mass destruction, there's certain uh, laws in our code, in the federal code, that are similar in nature to that quote unquote gold star. And the WMD stuff falls under terrorism. That I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it falls under the same chapter in our US code as the material support. So it's all in that terrorism nexus, which, that's, as we've said many times here on the show, is the big one for the FBI. That's where they can go to Congress, and that's how they get their massive budget, is because they lean onto doing a terrorism, do a terrorism, friend, and poking you with the stick to get you to do it. So here's a guy, he seems unwell. He seems potentially like he could at least do this mass shooting. Let's get some intervention, which we've talked about before too. That is another crucial aspect of law enforcement work, is to intervene before crime happens, so you can stop crime from happening. Maybe this guy needed to be institutionalized. Maybe he needed different meds, or to be on meds in the first place. Maybe he did need to be arrested. I don't know. And we never will, because instead he got pushed into this idea, this plan, this plot to blow up a freaking power station.
Well, and as an aside to that, to show his commitment to the idea that he wanted to blow up a power station, he asked one of the snitches about getting a train derailer. So he just didn't know what plot he wanted. They picked the one, though, that served
Yes.
them the best, of
And
course, right?
of course.
So we'll back to the complaint here. I'm not going to scroll through it. I'll just leave the visual up there so you know where the source of this is. This is this criminal complaint in which the FBI agent's name isn't blacked out.
Interesting.
Angelo DeFeo.
Never heard of him.
Because they are proud of what they're doing with this. They're not hiding. They're not secret agents when it comes to this anymore.
This is a career case, Steve.
Well, Schuyler discussed the impact of attacking the large interstate electric substations, and then he started to talk, wouldn't you know it, about the fact that he had a manifesto outlining his desire to attack high tax cities or industrial areas to let the kikes lose money. So now we have a racially motivated violent extremism.
Yes.
Perfectly done. Well done.
Come on.
And he also told the Stitch that he had an affiliation with Atomwaffen Division 4 and the National Alliance. Not Division 4, the Atomwaffen Division. It's a typo. Well done, FBI.
Yes.
So
Way
that's
to check
just
your work there, Angelo.
a Nazi. It's a Nazi organization. So we have our predicated ideology, because that's in the books. The FBI considers a neo-Nazi movement racially motivated violent extremism. We've now connected the dots, and we just need to push him to go and commit to do the terrorism. But that wasn't good enough. After blaming 9/11 on the Jews, this retarded guy, Schuyler, he continued to meet with the snitches. They introduced him to not one, not two, but 3 undercover employees.
You know what, dude? They want to just rack up the TDYs, and oh man, I just can picture it. I can picture this unfolding in an FBI office in anywhere, not just Nashville.
How
but
can I get
anywhere.
my buddies? How can I
Yeah.
get more people in on this thing? Because I want to brief it up the chain of command. The only way that things get spun are up in the FBI.
That's right. And it goes back to what you said a little bit ago. It briefs well. And this is briefing real well.
It wasn't briefing well enough, though. They probably wanted to get the 7th floor on board. The 7th floor is being the director, right? This gets briefed directly to the 7th floor. So they spun up Schuyler into saying it wasn't just one power station. It's now grown into 8 or more power stations. He wanted to cripple. He wanted to attack high tax areas to hurt the Jews, but now he's decided he wants to cripple the United States power supply.
Yes.
Through his research.
Pick a target, buddy.
Through his research, Schuyler concluded that attacking the electric substations with rifles would not cripple the substations, and he wanted to have widespread power outages. So that's when he came finally on the plot. And the plot was to use a drone with explosives attached to it and fly the drone into the electric substations. I'm trying hard not to laugh because they put this dude in a cage, right? He
Oh,
needed to be in an asylum.
mm-hmm.
And they put this guy in a state, but the plot is patently ridiculous.
Yes.
And it's either the coming out of a retarded man's head or 5 agents of the US government. I don't know who is more retarded. But Skyler told the undercovers that he would provide them with a list of components needed to build the drone. Does he sound like he can acquire a drone or build it himself? No. He's going to task his undercover buddies with building a drone that he researches that he needs parts for. And he also wants to 3D print it if possible.
Well, because that,
He sent links to YouTube videos depicting how you could build a drone. He went on YouTube and said, "How do I build a drone?" And the algorithm spit that out. Skyler asked the undercovers if they intended to surveil the targeted substation with him. So they drove him. They gave him a ride because he probably can't drive himself.
Hey, hop in. Well, hey, we'll pick you up.
At that point, he tasks this third undercover who they introduce. This is the explosives guy. Hey, I got a friend. Let me introduce you to him.
He was a bomb technician, in the global war on terror.
But before they actually commit to buying the explosives and getting the explosives, this is the level of operational security. And I would bring this down. I'll just look off screen for it because I'm tired of staring at that page. This is the operational security that Skyler proposes to his undercover buddies. And this is indicating to them that they're articulating to the judge, that they will articulate to the jury, indicates how sophisticated he was, right? So they want to carry out the attacks. And in order to avoid detection, Skyler comes up with this idea. All right. We need to rent a car like a Prius so that it would blend into the residential neighborhood. That's where they're going to launch the drone from. He suggested that they wear boot covers, cut off a tread of any of the boots worn, wear shoes on one size larger, and that would hinder the potential law enforcement who are going to be looking for the boot sizes on the concrete. Larger boots than necessary. They would dress as if they were members of the clergy and wear fake glasses on the night of the attack. On the night of the attack, they're going to be wearing sunglasses. Okay.
I wear my sunglasses at night.
Masks and leather gloves, because latex and nitrile gloves can transfer fingerprints. Why do you wear fingerprints when you handle evidence? But I am not retarded, so I know some things. And that they should burn their clothes after the attack. Then he meets with the explosives guy, and he said he wants some C4. He wants a pound of C4, and then he changes his mind because to take down the national power grid, he needs 3 pounds of C4.
Oh.
For the low price of $150. And the undercover says, I can get that done.
Yeah. Can we get the Price is Right music playing? Because, dude, if anything, this shows his lack of sophistication. It's probably crap that he saw in these YouTube videos that he was watching. Because does anybody here know how to get C4? Like, do you know where it comes from? Do you know who can get it? Oh yeah, but the undercover, I can get that for you for $150. Give me a freaking break. You're not getting C4 from anywhere except a military installation. That's it. So to get actual C4, the real deal C4, not some homemade thing, and maybe there's people out there who do know how to make very similar, compounds like C4, but you're not getting the real deal unless you're getting it from under lock and key, behind the gate. Like to even get on a military base, you have to get through the first gate, and then you have to get to an armory that has C4, not just one that has bullets, regular ammo. Because the explosives, the grenades, the C4, the other explosive items that they have, good luck getting that. Oh, I can get you a pound. I can get you a pound of it for $150. Okay, sure you can. And this is where it shows his lack of sophistication, is where he probably just goes, and I know you'll tell us, but he goes, oh, okay, great, $150. Sign me up.
I mean, I'm not giving anything away. They arrest him, right? Eventually, but again, back to his level of sophistication, they had to get him to take the glory shot, right? This is how they toyed with this guy because he's this retarded. They're like, hey, let's take a picture of ourselves with all the incriminating evidence in it before we go about doing the attack. And he also he did some sort of like Norse prayer because reasons. But so included in the complaint is this picture of him posing with two of the undercovers who one is blocked out his face, the other one has a ridiculous mask on, and then they have our character there wearing the skull mask because they're like, this guy's an idiot, and we're just going to keep doing it. And you know, I've got two things on my mind now because I'm just thinking one being toying with somebody but doing it in a way that was going to incriminate them worse. I've done it, but I did it to a guy who had already committed the crime. Uh, and it was a guy who had, keep it family friendly, digitally penetrated a little girl.
Mm.
And I got him to admit to it. He said, yes, I did it. And I said, okay. And the way I did it was I said, was it your whole finger or just the tip? And he said, well, it was just a tip. I said, oh, okay, I just want to make sure that we're not saying it's the whole finger. I don't want to get you saying something that didn't happen. I just want you to admit to just a little bit, right? Meanwhile, I know in the back of my head, he's admitting to this crime, this abhorrent crime. So I took a sheet of paper and I had him draw an outline of his hand and then mark the level of the finger that he did that with and initial it and date it so that I had that. And the piece of paper that I did was on the back of his waiver of his Miranda rights. It was like the ultimate trophy that I kept with me forever. I was like, guys, you're not going to believe what I got. This is unbelievable that he did this. But he's a pretty horrible person, and I don't feel bad for having that trophy. That's the level of doing that. And even to reference your discussion of how to get these to get C4 to get these explosives. We're now 26 months after being whistleblowers, and I'm 25 months after having my name go public. Within the first week, I had a CHS hit me up and try to get me to enlist in a plan to go and get government resources. And they asked me, and I was like, that's a snitch because I'm not a retard. And I severed all communications. I said, no, you can't get that. By the way, that's government stuff. That would be a crime to do that. And wouldn't you know it, no further information from that snitch. But I was actually trained and knew what was going on. So, you know, for the case that may or not currently exist, that LinkedIn message, I turned that one away. FBI.
Yeah. Dude, it's funny. Like, we haven't really talked about that type of thing very often, but I'd have to go back and check the dates, but very similarly, all sorts of random. Why am I getting a random text message from somebody I don't know on Telegram or Signal? We're not dumb. We know you listen. Maybe you're not listening to this one because it's a Saturday.
The
But-
final Saturday.
Right. You're going to have to step it up a little bit to ensnare people like us. We did it. We did the thing, to quote the self-licking ice cream cone that is Joe Biden. But yeah, it's just ridiculous, man. And it really riles me up because we didn't do anything wrong is the piece that they fail to remember. So it's, well, what can we get them on? What can we get them on now? And I know we've said it before, if they're willing to do it to us, employees of theirs, what are they willing to do to you? They're willing to go to the same steps that we just talked about in all of these cases to you, the listener. So beware of somebody sliding into your DMs. Beware of anybody with the worst, who's affirming all your worst ideas, because it's most likely a CHS, and part of that 42 million a year payroll. Ah, man, I didn't anticipate getting fired up like this, but it's a good reminder. Like, oh yeah, there was that text message or that phone call or that text message or that text message or that text message or that text message.
They come in.
And it really increased after we testified too. And I was like, okay, I'm not dumb. What are you sending everybody to try to ping us? And I would respond and say, who are you? Why are you messaging me? And then, well, why are you getting mad? I'm not mad. I'm just
Look,
asking
man, I'm
you
just trying to
questions.
get paid here.
How'd you get my phone number to text me here? Good grief.
Yeah.
So maddening. And on top of this WMD related one, because it they certainly are propping it up as fantastic work by the FBI and our law enforcement partners. And again, I don't think this dude was a good dude. Do I think he would have pulled off a mass shooting? Probably not. I certainly don't think he would have been able to pull off anything even close to this power grid takedown that they're pitching as his plan and his plot, even though the three undercovers uh, basically did all the heavy lifting along the way. But it made me think of this case in 2018 in Texas. There were these 5 package bombs in and around like the Austin area of Texas. FBI worked on this case, and I met the agent at one of my WMD trainings because as some of you remember, I was an assistant weapons of mass destruction coordinator. That was one of my other hats, and I go to this training, and he gave a briefing on it. And this is the type of work the FBI should be doing. Packages start exploding in and around the Austin area. What do we do? People are living in fear. They don't want to get the mail. They don't want to open packages. Well, you get the FBI on it, and you get local and state on it, and you get the ATF, and you get everybody who's available to come and help to stop an actual terrorist. This guy, 23-year-old Mark Anthony Condit, who is sending around these packages because he's actually a terrorist. And you know what? They ended up catching him. And maybe eventually we'll get into some of these actual good jobs that the FBI does, because it ended up being a good job because you caught the bad guy who was doing the crime. You weren't spending countless resources trying to just make it up.
That's Trevor's response. He's not where we are at, where we want the FBI gone, but he says, like, there's legitimate things I'd like you to allocate time and manpower and resources to, as opposed to the terror factory where you're generating these sorts of things.
Yeah.
I have a palate cleanse or two, but want to give you the final thoughts for us today, Garrett. If you have it, the floor is yours.
I do. We are back in Proverbs again. The wisdom books, man. There really are lots of wisdom there. Chapter 28 of Proverbs, in verse, where am I? 15. Like a roaring lion or a charging bear is a wicked ruler over a poor people. A ruler who lacks understanding is a cruel oppressor, but he who hates unjust gain will prolong his days. Quite frankly, the FBI is a charging bear, and we are the poor people under their wicked ruling. And not just the FBI, but lots of entities in government. And then that next verse that says, a ruler who lacks understanding is a cruel oppressor. It's cruel oppressorship to have the terror factory. It's cruel oppressorship to ensnare. I mean, it's got to be hundreds of people by now, instead of having what does it say? Who, instead of having understanding, they lack it, and they just plow ahead like that charging bear. And then it even mentions unjust gain, like the TDY and the per diem payments for the UCEs and the promotions and whatever else awards that are going to come from a case like this, or cases like these that we've talked about all day today. And I don't know, it just, if you aren't there already, you really can't despise an entity like the FBI enough, is the point.
All right. I have a photograph which launched off into a palate cleanse video because we're still coming off of the election week, and with percolating amongst our chat, we did circulate this around, which I thought was pretty good and pretty clever. And it was somebody put out there this for those listening. It's a picture of an AR that's hiding partially under a bed with a hand saying, "You can come out now, little buddy. It's safe. That bad lady is gone and not coming back anymore." We definitely had that sentiment around. And then we have the ballot cleanse, which is an oldie but a goodie. I don't know if you follow Sebastian Maniscalco.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, he's
he's another hilarious one.
but he's got a bit. This one not about the AR, but maybe a more appropriate weapon for days of old or even today.
My buddy, being ex-military, he's ready for the end of the world, this guy. This guy got a lot of weapons at the house. Got a compound bow and arrow. Now, if you don't know anything about a compound bow, the arrow travels at about 300 yards per second. You can take out a giraffe, no problem. He's got this thing in the house. I go, John, what the hell you got this in the house for? He's like, you kidding me? It's for home invasion. Home invasion? Could you imagine the poor bastard that breaks into my buddy's house? As a burglar, you can't even prepare for something like that. The burglar thinks nobody's home. He comes through a kitchen window. My buddy hears him. He gets out his bow and arrow. The burglar's in the living room. He suspects nothing. He's stealing valuables. Then out of nowhere,
Maybe use that.
Yeah.
I don't know if the FBI will be able to jam you up on a 922G case if you're using a compound bow instead of the AR.
Oh, that's hilarious. I feel like I need to go watch an entire Sebastian stand-up now.
He's been around for a long time. I actually saw him when I was in college, way before he was a
wow.
thing. When he was
Yeah.
a pretty young comic, and he was great then. So he charted a course for himself as our week, as we're endeavoring to do this here on the American Radicals podcast. Maybe one day we'll stop playing content creator fantasy camp and do it for the big time.
Yeah.
And that's going to start next week. We go to the big time. They'll go into the show, the 9:30 Eastern time show. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the new time slot. That's where we're going to see you guys next week, starting Monday here on Rumble, rumble.com/amradpod. Until then, have a great weekend.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.